A New Year's Party by Mary Graham Bonner. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. A New Year's Party. Just because it was the first day of the year, commenced Daddy, and because parties were about the nicest things in the world to the mind of a little girl named Ella, her mother decided to give her one. "It certainly does seem like the first of the year, or the first of something," said Ella. "It's a new day, a new year, and we have new toys and new games. We are even going to have supper out of new dishes." For among the presents Santa Claus had brought to Ella was a fine set of dishes. They were pink and white, and there were 6 cups and saucers, 6 little plates, a teapot, sugar bowl, and cream jug. It was really a very complete set. They had thin bread and butter, hot chocolate with whipped cream, and a cake which Ella's mother called a New Year's cake. It was pink and white on the top, with pink sugared trimmings on the white frosting. In the center of the cake was one pink candle, for Ella's mother said it would be quite impossible to have a candle for the number of years there had been, and, too, it would be nice to have a new way and just consider the year a day old. After the cake had been almost entirely eaten, they played house. Each little girl took a corner of the room as her house and fixed it up with some of Ella's things. They all had their own dolls and many of their other toys, so they really felt quite at home. Then they began calling on each other, dressing up in shawls and old hats which Ella's mother let them use. After a while they heard a flutter against the window pane, and then another little flapping sound. "It's a little bird," said Ella as she looked out of the window. "It's right on the sill, and I am dreadfully afraid it has hurt its wings. Poor little dear." They opened the window, and Ella took the little bird in her hands. Oh, how cold the little bird's feathers were! "We'll take care of you," said Ella. They gave the little bird some breadcrumbs and some water. Then he had a delicious piece of lettuce from the seeds which Ella had started in a box in her room. Pretty soon the bird began to grow much better and hopped and chirped about the room, and then they let him out, for he had simply been very hungry. "We'll put some suet in that tree over there," said Ella. "Let's put some breadcrumbs," said her friends, and then one of them added, "And let's give them some of the New Year cake crumbs, too." So the little bird was given a regular New Year's feast, and Ella and her friends were among other children who decided to look after the feathered people through the cold months of the winter, and to give them breadcrumbs and suet which they loved so well. End of A New Year's Party. Read by stepheather, 13th of January 2025, Bangalore, India.
The Drop of Water by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Drop of Water by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Tony Scheinman. You know surely what the microscope is. That wonderful little glass which makes everything appear 100 times larger than it really is? If you look through a microscope at a single drop of ditch water, you will see 1,000 odd-looking creatures, such as you never could imagine dwelled in water. They do not look unlike a whole plateful of shrimps, all jumping and crowding upon each other. So fierce are these little creatures that they will tear off each other's arms and legs without the least mercy, and yet, after their fashion, they look merry and happy. Now there was once an old man whom his neighbors called Cribbly Crabbly, a curious name to be sure, which meant something like creep and crawl. He always liked to make the most of everything, and when he could not manage it in the ordinary way, he tried magic. One day he sat looking through his microscope at a drop of water that had been brought from a neighboring ditch. What a scene of scrambling and swarming it was, to be sure! All the thousands of little imps in the water jumped and sprang about, devouring each other or tearing each other to bits. "Upon my word, this is really shocking. There must surely be some way to make them live in peace and quiet, so that each attends only to his own concerns." And he thought, and thought, but still could not hit upon any plan, so he must needs have recourse to conjuring. "I must give them color, so that they may be seen more plainly," said he. Accordingly, he poured something that looked like a drop of red wine. but which in reality was witch's blood, upon the drop of water. Immediately all the strange little creatures became red all over, and looked, for all the world, like a whole town full of naked red Indians.
"Why, what have you here?"
said another old magician, who had no name at all, which made him even more remarkable than Cribbly-Crabbly. "If you can find out what it is," replied Cribbly-Crabbly, "I will give it to you. But I warn you, you'll not do so easily." The conjurer without a name looked through the microscope, and it seemed to him that the scene before him was a whole town in which the people ran about naked in the wildest way. It was quite shocking. Still more horrible was it to see how they kicked and cuffed, struggled and fought, pecked, bit, tore and swallowed, each his neighbor. Those that were under wanted to be at the top, while those that chanced to be at the top must needs thrust themselves underneath.
"And now look, his leg is longer than mine, so off with it,"
one seemed to be saying. Another had a little lump behind his ear, an innocent little lump enough, but it seemed to pain him, and therefore the others seemed determined that it should pain him more. So they hacked at it and dragged the poor thing about, and at last ate him up, all on account of the little lump. One only of the creatures was quiet, a modest little maid, who sat by herself, evidently wishing for nothing but peace and quietness. The others would not have it so, however. They soon pulled the little damsel forward, cuffed and tore her, and then ate her up.
"This is uncommonly droll and amusing,"
said the nameless magician. "Yes, but what do you think it is?" said Cribbly-Crabbly. "Can you make it out?"
"It is easy enough to guess, to be sure,"
was the reply of the nameless magician.
"Easy enough. It is either Paris or Copenhagen, or some other great city. I don't know which, for they are all alike. It is some great city, of course."
"It is a drop of ditch water," said Cribbly-Crabbly. End of The Drop of Water by Hans Christian Andersen.
The Tale of Jemima Puddle-Duck by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. What a funny sight it is to see a brood of ducklings with a hen. Listen to the story of Jemima Puddle-Duck, who was annoyed because the farmer's wife would not let her hatch her own eggs. Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Rebecca Puddle-Duck, was perfectly willing to leave the hatchling to someone else. "I have not the patience to sit on a nest for 28 days, and no more have you, Jemima. You would let them go cold, you know you would." "I wish to hatch my own eggs. I will hatch them all by myself," quacked Jemima Puddle-Duck. She tried to hide her eggs, but they were always found and carried off. Jemima Puddle-Duck became quite desperate. She determined to make a nest right away from the farm. She set off on a fine spring afternoon along the cart road that leads over the hill. She was wearing a shawl and a poke bonnet. When she reached the top of the hill, she saw a wood in the distance. She thought that it looked a safe, quiet spot. Jemima Puddle-Duck was not much in the habit of flying. She ran downhill a few yards, flapping her shawl, and then she jumped off into the air. She flew beautifully when she had got a good start. She skimmed along over the treetops until she saw an open place in the middle of the wood, where the trees and brushwood had been cleared. Jemima alighted rather heavily, and began to waddle about in search of a convenient dry nesting place. She rather fancied a tree stump among some tall foxgloves. But, seated upon the stump, she was startled to find an elegantly dressed gentleman reading a newspaper. He had black prick ears and sandy-colored whiskers. "Quack?" said Jemima Puddle-Duck, with her head and her bonnet on one side. "Quack?" The gentleman raised his eyes above his newspaper and looked curiously at Jemima. "Madam, have you lost your way?" said he. He had a long bushy tail which he was sitting upon, as the stump was somewhat damp. Jemima thought him mighty civil and handsome. She explained that she had not lost her way, but that she was trying to find a convenient dry nesting place. "Ah, is that so, indeed?" said the gentleman with sandy whiskers, looking curiously at Jemima. He folded up the newspaper and put it in his coat-tail pocket. Jemima complained of the superfluous hen. Indeed, how interesting. I wish I could meet with that fowl. I would teach it to mind its own business. But as to a nest, there is no difficulty. I have a sack full of feathers in my woodshed. No, my dear madam, you will be in nobody's way. You may sit there as long as you like, said the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He led the way to a very retired, dismal-looking house amongst the foxgloves. It was built of faggots and turf, and there were 2 broken pails, one on top of another, by way of a chimney. This is my summer residence. You would not find my earth, my winter house, so convenient, said the hospitable gentleman. There was a tumble-down shed at the back of the house, made of old soap-boxes. The gentleman opened the door and showed Jemima in. The shed was almost quite full of feathers. It was almost suffocating, but it was comfortable and very soft. Jemima Puddle-Duck was rather surprised to find such a vast quantity of feathers, but it was very comfortable, and she made a nest without any trouble at all. When she came out, the sandy-whiskered gentleman was sitting on a log reading the newspaper. At least he had it spread out, but he was looking over the top of it. He was so polite that he seemed almost sorry to let Jemima go home for the night. He promised to take great care of her nest until she came back again the next day. He said he loved eggs and ducklings. He should be proud to see a fine nestful in his woodshed. Jemima Puddle-Duck came every afternoon. She laid 9 eggs in the nest. They were greeny white and very large. The foxy gentleman admired them immensely. He used to turn them over and count them when Jemima was not there. At last Jemima told him that she intended to begin to sit next day. And I will bring a bag of corn with me, so that I need never leave my nest until the eggs are hatched. They might catch cold, said the conscientious Jemima. Madam, I beg you not to trouble yourself with a bag. I will provide oats. But before you commence your tedious sitting, I intend to give you a treat. Let us have a dinner party all to ourselves. May I ask you to bring up some herbs from the farm garden to make a savory omelet? Sage and thyme and mint and 2 onions and some parsley. I will provide lard for the stuff, lard for the omelet, said the hospitable gentleman with the sandy whiskers. Jemima Puddle-Duck was a simpleton. Not even the mention of sage and onions made her suspicious. She went round the farm garden, nibbling off snippets of all the different sorts of herbs that are used for stuffing roast duck. And she waddled into the kitchen and got 2 onions out of a basket. The collie dog Kep met her coming out. What are you doing with those onions? Where do you go every afternoon by yourself, Jemima Puddle-Duck? Jemima was rather in awe of the collie. She told him the whole story. The collie listened with his wise head on one side. He grinned when she described the polite gentleman with sandy whiskers. He asked several questions about the wood and about the exact position of the house and shed. Then he went out and trotted down the village. He went to look for 2 foxhound puppies who were out at walk with the butcher. Jemima Puddle-Duck went up the cart road for the last time on a sunny afternoon. She was rather burdened with bunches of herbs and 2 onions in a bag. She flew over the wood and alighted opposite the house of the bushy, long-tailed gentleman. He was sitting on a log. He sniffed the air and kept glancing uneasily round the wood. When Jemima alighted, he quite jumped. Come into the house as soon as you have looked at your eggs. Give me the herbs for the omelet. Be sharp. He was rather abrupt. Jemima Puddle-Duck had never heard him speak like that. She felt surprised and uncomfortable. While she was inside, she heard pattering feet round the back of the shed. Someone with a black nose sniffed at the bottom of the door and then locked it. Jemima became much alarmed. A moment afterwards, there were most awful noises. Barking, baying, growls and howls, squealing and groans. And nothing more was ever seen of that foxy whiskered gentleman. Presently Kep opened the door of the shed and let out Jemima Puddle-Duck. Unfortunately, the puppies rushed in and gobbled up all the eggs before he could stop them. He had a bite on his ear, and both the puppies were limping. Jemima Puddle-Duck was escorted home in tears on account of those eggs. She laid some more in June, and she was permitted to keep them herself, but only 4 of them hatched. Jemima Puddle-Duck said that it was because of her nerves, but she had always been a bad sitter. End of The Tale of Jemima Puddle-Duck by Beatrix Potter.
The Last Dream of the Old Oak by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Last Dream of the Old Oak by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Tony Scheinman. In the forest, high up on the steep shore, and not far from the open sea-coast, stood a very old oak tree. It was just 365 years old, but that long time was to the tree as the same number of days might be to us. We wake by day and sleep by night, and then we have our dreams. It is different with the tree. It is obliged to keep awake through 3 seasons of the year, and does not get any sleep until winter comes. Winter is its time for rest, its night after the long day of spring, summer, and autumn. During many a warm summer, the ephemeras, which are flies that exist for only a day, had fluttered about the old oak, enjoyed life, and felt happy. And if, for a moment, one of the tiny creatures rested on the large fresh leaves, the tree would always say, "Poor little creature, your whole life consists of but a single day. How very short! It must be quite melancholy." "Melancholy? What do you mean?" the little creature would always reply. "Why do you say that? Everything around me is so wonderfully bright and warm and beautiful that it makes me joyous." "But only for one day, and then it is all over." "Over?" repeated the fly. "What is the meaning of all over? Are you all over too?" "No. I shall very likely live for thousands of your days, and my day is whole seasons long. Indeed, it is so long that you could never reckon it up." "No? Then I don't understand you. You may have thousands of my days, but I have thousands of moments in which I can be merry and happy. Does all the beauty of the world cease when you die?" "No," replied the tree. "It will certainly last much longer, infinitely longer than I can think of." "Well then," said the little fly, "we have the same time to live, only we reckon differently." And the little creature danced and floated in the air, rejoicing in its delicate wings of gauze and velvet, rejoicing in the balmy breezes laden with the fragrance from the clover fields and wild roses, elder blossoms, and honeysuckle, and from the garden hedges of wild thyme, primroses, and mint. The perfume of all these was so strong that it almost intoxicated the little fly. The long and beautiful day had been so full of joy and sweet delights that when the sun sank, the fly felt tired of all its happiness and enjoyment. Its wings could sustain it no longer, and gently and slowly it glided down to the soft, waving blades of grass, nodded its little head as well as it could, and slept peacefully and sweetly. The fly was dead. "Poor little ephemera," said the oak. "What a short life!" And so, on every summer day, the dance was repeated, the same questions were asked, and the same answers given, and there was the same peaceful falling asleep at sunset. This continued through many generations of ephemeras, and all of them felt merry and happy. The oak remained awake through the morning of spring, the noon of summer, and the evening of autumn. Its time of rest, its night, drew near. Its winter was coming. Here fell a leaf, and there fell a leaf. Already the storms were singing, "Good night, good night. We will rock you and lull you. Go to sleep, go to sleep. We will sing you to sleep and shake you to sleep, and will do your old twigs good. They will even crackle with pleasure. Sleep sweetly, sleep sweetly. It is your 365th night. You are still very young in the world. Sleep sweetly. The clouds will drop snow upon you, which will be your coverlid, warm and sheltering to your feet. Sleep sweet to you, and pleasant dreams." And there stood the oak, stripped of all its leaves, left to rest during the whole of a long winter, and to dream many dreams of events that had happened, just as men dream. The great tree had once been small. Indeed, in its cradle it had been an acorn. According to human reckoning, it was now in the 4th century of its existence. It was the largest and best tree in the forest. Its summit towered above all the other trees and could be seen far out to sea, so that it served as a landmark to the sailors. It had no idea how many eyes looked eagerly for it. In its topmost branches, the wood-pigeon built her nest, and the cuckoo sang his well-known song, the familiar notes echoing among the boughs. And in autumn, when the leaves looked like beaten copper plates, the birds of passage came and rested on the branches before beginning their flight across the sea. But now that it was winter, the tree stood leafless, so that everyone could see how crooked and bent were the branches that sprang forth from the trunk. Crows and rooks came by turns and sat on them, and talked of the hard times that were beginning, and how difficult it was in winter to obtain a living. It was just at the holy Christmas time that the tree dreamed a dream. The tree had doubtless a feeling that the festive time had arrived, and in its dream fancied it heard the bells of the churches ringing. And yet it seemed to be a beautiful summer's day, mild and warm. The tree's mighty summit was crowned with spreading, fresh green foliage. The sunbeams played among its leaves and branches, and the air was full of fragrance from herb and blossom. Painted butterflies chased each other. The summer flies danced around it, as if the world had been created merely that they might dance and be merry. All that had happened to the tree during all the years of its life seemed to pass before it as in a festive pageant. It saw the knights of olden times and noble ladies ride through the wood on their gallant steeds, with plumes waving in their hats and with falcons on their wrists, while the hunting horns sounded and the dogs barked. It saw hostile warriors in colored dress and glittering armor, with spear and halberd, pitching their tents and again taking them down. The watchfires blazed, and men sang and slept under the hospitable shelter of the tree. It saw lovers meet in quiet happiness near it in the moonshine, and carve the initials of their names in the grayish-green bark of its trunk. Once, but long years had passed since then. Guitars and Aeolian harps had been hung on its boughs by merry travelers. Now they seemed to hang there again, and their marvelous notes sounded again. The wood-pigeons cooed as if to express the feelings of the tree, and the cuckoo called out to tell it how many summer days it had yet to live. Then it seemed to it that new life was thrilling through every fiber of root and stem and leaf, rising even to its highest branches. The tree felt itself stretching and spreading out, while through the root beneath the earth ran the warm vigor of life. As it grew higher and still higher, and its strength increased, the topmost boughs became broader and fuller, and in proportion to its growth, its self-satisfaction increased, and there came a joyous longing to grow higher and higher, to reach even to the warm, bright sun itself. Already had its topmost branches pierced the clouds, which floated beneath them like troops of birds of passage or large white swans. Every leaf seemed gifted with sight, as if it possessed eyes to see. The stars became visible in broad daylight, large and sparkling, like clear and gentle eyes. They brought to the tree's memory the light that it had seen in the eyes of a child, and in the eyes of lovers who had once met beneath the branches of the old oak. These were wonderful and happy moments for the old oak, full of peace and joy. And yet, amidst all this happiness, the tree felt a yearning desire that all the other trees, bushes, herbs, and flowers beneath it might also be able to rise higher, to see all this splendor and experience the same happiness. The grand, majestic oak could not be quite happy in its enjoyment until all the rest, both great and small, could share it. and this feeling of yearning trembled through every branch, through every leaf, as warmly and fervently as through a human heart. The summit of the tree waved to and fro and bent downwards, as if in its silent longing it sought something. Then there came to it the fragrance of thyme, and the more powerful scent of honeysuckle and violets, and the tree fancied it heard the note of the cuckoo. At length its longing was satisfied. Up through the clouds came the green summits of the forest trees, and the oak watched them rising higher and higher. Bush and herb shot upward, and some even tore themselves up by the roots to rise more quickly. The quickest of all was the birch tree. Like a lightning flash, the slender stem shot upwards in a zigzag line, the branches spreading round it like green gauze and banners. Every native of the wood, even to the brown and feathery rushes, grew with the rest, while the birds ascended with the melody of song. On a blade of grass that fluttered in the air like a long green ribbon sat a grasshopper, cleaning its wings with its legs. May beetles hummed, bees murmured, birds sang, each in its own way. The air was filled with the sounds of song and gladness. "But where is the little blue flower that grows by the water, and the purple bellflower and the daisy?" asked the oak. "I want them all." "Here we are! Here we are!" came the reply in words and in song. "But the beautiful time of last summer, where is that? And where are the lilies of the valley which last year covered the earth with their bloom, and the wild apple tree with its fragrant blossoms, and all the glory of the wood which has flourished year after year? And where is even what may have but just been born?" "We are here! We are here!" sounded voices high up in the air, as if they had flown there beforehand. "Why, this is beautiful! Too beautiful to be believed!" cried the oak in a joyful tone. "I have them all here, both great and small. Not one has been forgotten. Can such happiness be imagined? It seems almost impossible." "In heaven with the eternal God, it can be imagined, for all things are possible," sounded the reply through the air. And the old tree, as it still grew upwards and onwards, felt that its roots were loosening itself from the earth. "It is right so. It is best," said the tree. "No fetters hold me now. I can fly up to the very highest point in light and glory, and all I love are with me, both small and great. All are here." Such was the dream of the old oak at the holy Christmas time. And while it dreamed, a mighty storm came rushing over land and sea. The sea rolled in great billows toward the shore. A cracking and crushing was heard in the tree. Its roots were torn from the ground, just at the moment when in its dream it was being loosened from the earth. It fell. Its 365 years were ended, like the single day of the ephemera. On the morning of Christmas Day, when the sun rose, the storm had ceased. From all the churches sounded the festival bells, and from every hearth, even of the smallest hut, rose the smoke into the blue sky, like the smoke from the festive thank-offerings on the Druids' altars. The sea gradually became calm, and on board a great ship that had withstood the tempest during the night, all the flags were displayed as a token of joy and festivity. "The tree is down! The old oak, our landmark on the coast!" exclaimed the sailors. "It must have fallen in the storm of last night. Who can replace it? Alas, no one." This was the old tree's funeral oration, brief but well said. There it lay, stretched on the snow-covered shore, and over it sounded the notes of a song from the ship, a song of Christmas joy, of the redemption of the soul of man, and of eternal life through the Christ. Sing aloud on this happy morn. All is fulfilled, for Christ is born. With songs of joy, let us loudly sing hallelujahs to Christ our King. Thus sounded the Christmas carol, and everyone on board the ship felt his thoughts elevated through the song and the prayer, even as the old tree had felt lifted up in its last beautiful dream on that Christmas morn. End of The Last Dream of the Old Oak by Hans Christian Andersen. The Leaping Match by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Leaping Match by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Tony Scheinman. The flea, the grasshopper, and the frog once wanted to see which of them could jump the highest. They made a festival and invited the whole world and everyone else besides who liked to come and see the grand sight. 3 famous jumpers they were, as all should say, when they met together in the room.
"I will give my daughter to him who shall jump the highest," said the king. "It would be too bad for you to have the jumping and for us to offer no prize."
The flea was the first to come forward. He had most exquisite manners, and bowed to the company on every side, for he was of noble blood, and besides was accustomed to the society of man, and that, of course, had been an advantage to him. Next came the grasshopper. He was not quite so elegantly formed as the flea, but he knew perfectly well how to conduct himself, and he wore the green uniform which belonged to him by right of birth. He said, moreover, that he came of a very ancient Egyptian family, and that in the house where he then lived he was much thought of. The fact was that he had been just brought out of the fields and put in a carved house 3 stories high and built on purpose for him, with the colored sides inwards and doors and windows cut out of the Queen of Hearts. "And I sing so well," said he, "that 16 parlor-bred crickets, who have chirped from infancy, and yet got no one to build them card-houses to live in, have fretted themselves thinner even than before, from sheer vexation on hearing me." It was thus that the flea and the grasshopper made the most of themselves, each thinking himself quite an equal match for the princess. The leap-frog said not a word, but people said that perhaps he thought the more, and the house-dog who snuffed at him with his nose allowed that he was of good family. The old counselor, who had had 3 orders given him in vain for keeping quiet, asserted that the leap-frog was a prophet, for that one could see on his back whether the coming winter was to be severe or mild, which is more than one can see on the back of the man who writes the almanac.
"I say nothing for the present," exclaimed the king. "Yet I have my own opinion, for I observe everything."
And now the match began. The flea jumped so high that no one could see what had become of him, and so they insisted that he had not jumped at all, which was disgraceful after all the fuss he had made. The grasshopper jumped only half as high, but he leaped into the king's face, who was disgusted by his rudeness. The leap-frog stood for a long time, as if lost in thought. People began to think he would not jump at all.
"I'm afraid he is ill,"
said the dog, and he went to snuff at him again, when, lo, he suddenly made a sidewise jump into the lap of the princess, who sat close by on a little golden stool.
"There is nothing higher than my daughter," said the king. "Therefore to bound into her lap is the highest jump that can be made. Only one of good understanding would ever have thought of that. Thus the frog has shown that he has sense. He has brains in his head, that he has."
And so he won the princess.
"I jumped the highest for all that," said the flea. "But it's all the same to me. The princess may have the stiff-legged, slimy creature, if she likes. In this world, merit seldom meets its reward. Dullness and heaviness win the day. I am too light and airy for a stupid world."
And so the flea went into foreign service. The grasshopper sat without on a green bank and reflected on the world and its ways, and he too said,
Yes, dullness and heaviness win the day. A fine exterior is what people care for nowadays.
and he began to sing in his own peculiar way. And it is from his song that we have taken this little piece of history, which may very possibly be all untrue, although it does stand printed here in black and white. End of The Leaping Match by Hans Christian Andersen. The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen. Read by Tony Scheinman. It was dreadfully cold. It was snowing fast and was almost dark as evening came on, the last evening of the year. In the cold and the darkness there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home she had slippers on, it is true, but they were much too large for her feet, slippers that her mother had used till then. And the poor little girl lost them in running across the street when two carriages were passing terribly fast. When she looked for them, one was not to be found, and a boy seized the other and ran away with it, saying he would use it as a cradle some day when he had children of his own. So on the little girl went with her bare feet, that were red and blue with cold. In an old apron that she wore were bundles of matches, and she carried a bundle also in her hand. No one had bought so much as a bunch all the long day, and no one had given her even a penny. Poor little girl! Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, a perfect picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long flaxen hair, which hung in pretty curls about her throat, but she thought not of her beauty, nor of the cold. Lights gleamed in every window, and there came to her the savory smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve, and it was this of which she thought. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sat cowering down. She had drawn under her little feet, but still she grew colder and colder. Yet she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches and could not bring a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her, and besides, it was cold enough at home, for they had only the house roof above them, and though the largest holes had been stopped with straw and rags, there were left many through which the cold wind could whistle. And now her little hands were nearly frozen with cold. Alas! A single match might do her good if she might only draw it from the bundle, rub it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. So at last she drew one out. Whisht! How it blazed and burned! It gave out a warm, bright flame like a little candle as she held her hands over it. A wonderful little light it was. It really seemed to the little girl as if she sat before a great iron stove with polished brass feet and brass shovel and tongs. So blessedly it burned that the little maiden stretched out her feet to warm them also. How comfortable she was! But lo, the flame went out, the stove vanished, and nothing remained but the little burned match in her hand. She rubbed another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a veil, so that she could see through it into the room. A snow-white cloth was spread upon the table, on which was a beautiful china dinner service, while a roast goose, stuffed with apples and prunes, steamed famously and sent forth a most savory smell, And what was more delightful still and wonderful, the goose jumped from the dish with knife and fork still in its breast and waddled along the floor straight to the little girl. But the match went out then, and nothing was left to her but the thick, damp wall. She lighted another match, and now she was under a most beautiful Christmas tree, larger and far more prettily trimmed than the one she had seen through the glass doors at the rich merchant's. Hundreds of wax tapers were burning on the green branches, and gay figures, such as she had seen in shop windows, looked down upon her. The child stretched out her hands to them, and then the match went out. Still the lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them now as stars in heaven, and one of them fell, forming a long trail of fire. "Now someone is dying," murmured the child softly, for her grandmother, the only person who had loved her and who was now dead, had told her that whenever a star falls, a soul mounts up to God. She struck yet another match against the wall, and again it was light, and in the brightness there appeared before her the dear old grandmother, bright and radiant, yet sweet and mild and happy as she had never looked on earth. "Oh, grandmother," cried the child, "take me with you. I know you will go away when the match burns out. You too will vanish like the warm stove, the splendid New Year's feast, the beautiful Christmas tree." And lest her grandmother should disappear, she rubbed the whole bundle of matches against the wall. And the matches burned with such a brilliant light that it became brighter than noonday. Her grandmother had never looked so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both flew together, joyously and gloriously, mounting higher and higher, far above the earth, and for them there was neither hunger, nor cold, nor care. They were with God. But in the corner, at the dawn of day, sat the poor girl, leaning against the wall, with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and cold she sat, with the matches, one bundle of which was burned. She wanted to warm herself, poor little thing, people said. No one imagined what sweet visions she had had, or how gloriously she had gone with her grandmother to enter upon the joys of a new year. End of The Little Match Girl by Hans Christian Andersen.
Little Susan and Her Lamb by American Sunday School Union. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. One fine summer's morning, little Susan's mother called her to come and have her breakfast. She took her porringer and sat down on a green bank near the cottage door to eat the bread and milk she had that morning, and liked it very much, as she did not always have milk for breakfast. While Susan was eating her breakfast, she thought about a very pretty book which had been given her the week before as a reward for her regular attendance at the Sunday school during the last half year. For it had pleased God that she should enjoy good health, and Susan knew too well the value of what she learned at the Sunday school ever to be absent when she could attend. I never heard of her playing about on a Sunday with rude idle children. She knew that would be breaking the Sabbath, and she desired to keep it holy. Which children do you think are the happiest? Those who play about and get into mischief on a Sunday, or those good children who attend public worship and endeavor to keep holy the Sabbath day? While Susan was eating her breakfast, she thought about her reward book, as I told you. It was Little Jane, the Young Cottager, and she wished that she might love the Savior and be happy like little Jane. When she had nearly finished her porringer, a man came by driving some sheep, which he was going to sell at the next town. Several of the sheep had little lambs with them, and some of these poor little creatures were so tired that they could hardly walk. One little lamb laid down just as it came to the place where Susan was sitting. The man tried to make it get up, but it could not rise and seemed to be dying. "Well," said he, "I'll have your skin at any rate." So saying, he was about to tie its legs together and take it upon his shoulder when Susan spoke to him and begged very hard that he would leave the little lamb with her, and she would nurse it. "Why, as for that," said the man, "I suppose I might as well give it to you at once, for I don't reckon you can make much hand of it, and I think I'll even give it to you, for now I recollect you are the little girl who ran after me over the common last summer, and told me of the boys who had driven 2 of my best sheep down yonder lane. I should not have found them again in a hurry if it had not been for you. Well, if you like to have the lamb, take it, and much good may it do you." He then called his dog and drove his sheep on. Susan thanked him. She put down her porringer and took up the lamb, and began to think what she should do with it. Its eyes were shut, and it seemed dying. "Well," said she, "it is no great matter to you, for I suppose they would have killed you tomorrow or next day, but I should have liked you to have lived and played with me. I would have tried to be kind to you, for the Bible says we are to be merciful to poor dumb creatures like you. God made you as well as me, and I recollect it is written that his tender mercies are over all his works." While she was talking in this manner, the lamb opened its eyes a little way and gave a faint bleat. Susan was delighted. "Poor little thing, perhaps you are hungry," she said, and taking her spoon she put a little of the milk into its mouth, and to her great joy saw that it was swallowed. Susan then gave the lamb some more and wrapped it up closer in her apron. It soon revived with the warmth and presently was able to stand. It then went to the porringer and drank the rest of Susan's breakfast. You may be sure she did not grudge it. Susan now went to her mother and told all that had happened and showed her the little lamb. Her mother said she might put it upon the grass plot behind the cottage. The little girl did so, and before night it was quite well again. Susan had to go every day to work, but you may be sure she did not neglect her little lamb. Every morning when she had her own breakfast she went and fed it very carefully, and the lamb was always ready to come as soon as it heard her little mistress call. Do you not think Susan felt very happy when she looked at the little lamb? She had been kind to it, and felt much more pleased than if she had not taken any care about it. I have known little boys, and girls too, who have taken pleasure in teasing poor animals, but I have always remarked that they were bad children. Those who can take pleasure in killing flies or hurting dumb creatures would delight in tormenting their brothers and sisters or companions, if they dared to do so, and when they grow up to be men and women, unless their evil habits are broken off, they will prove to be wicked people. Our hearts are naturally inclined to do what is evil, and will always take pleasure therein, if they are not changed by divine grace. This is what Jesus told Nicodemus, as you may read in the 3rd chapter of St. John. Little Susan had been taught this. She felt that it was true and prayed to God to give her a new heart. She prayed that she might love Christ and believe in him. Christ has said that those who ask shall receive, and in the book of Proverbs, which speaks of him as the true wisdom, we read that those who seek him early shall find him. Now, if Susan had not thought about these things and had been led to desire to do what was right, perhaps she would have helped the naughty boys in driving away the sheep instead of telling them, as she had done, that it was wrong, and following after their owner when she found they would not do what was right. When we see others do wrong, we should always try to persuade them to leave their evil ways, but if they will not listen to us, then we shall do all we can to prevent them from succeeding. The lamb soon grew very fond of Susan and followed her about everywhere. If she was absent from home longer than usual, it would lie down before the cottage door and watch for her, and as soon as she returned it would frisk about and look quite happy. It was just the same with Susan's companions. They were always glad to see her because she was gentle and kind to them. When I have seen little boys and girls cross and teasing each other, I have sometimes wondered why they could like to make others uncomfortable, for I have always observed that they did not look happy themselves. But when I recollected that the Bible tells us that the heart of man is naturally inclined to do evil, I have not wondered any longer at what I have seen. I then thought how very sad it was that children did not love the Saviour, for then they would have tried to be like him and would have been much happier. I have longed to tell them about Christ and how pleasant it is to know him and to love him. Sometimes when little boys and girls have read Janeway's Token for Children and other little books which have told them about children who have loved Christ, they have desired to be like them. Susan was like these good children, and if a poor man came to ask charity, she was always glad if her mother could spare anything for him. Remember that the Saviour came down from heaven to seek and to save that which is lost. He died upon the cross that we might be cleansed from our sins by his precious blood, and he suffered for us, that we might be sanctified or made holy by the power and influence of his Holy Spirit, and thus be made the children of God and heirs of his kingdom. My dear children, do you love the Savior? Do you wish to be like him, kind, merciful, patient, and of great goodness? Your little hearts will tell you whether you really desire this, and if you are still strangers to him, pray that he will, by the power of his Holy Spirit, teach you to know him and to love him. If you refuse to listen to these things and do not seek the Savior, you will be unhappy in this world and miserable in that which is to come. I have a little more to tell you about Susan and her lamb. Susan's mother spun its wool every year, and if you had gone to the cottage on a winter evening, you would have seen her busy with her spinning wheel, while Susan and her brothers were employed in other works, and one of them read aloud the Bible or some useful book. After the wool was spun, Susan knit stockings for herself and her brothers, which they found very warm and comfortable in the winter. In the course of a few years, the lamb grew up and had several other little lambs, so that in time Susan had a flock of sheep, which were a great help to the family. She was very glad that she had gone to the Sunday school and had been taught the text which made her wish to be kind to the little lamb. I hope my little readers will try to remember all that they read in their Bibles, remembering that the Bible tells us the commands of God, and in keeping his precepts there is great reward. End of Little Susan and Her Lamb by American Sunday School Union.
Naughty Wind by Mary Graham Bonner. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Naughty Wind. The clothespins on the line, said Daddy, were having a very jolly time. I'll blow those clothes away, said the North Wind. Oh, no, you won't, said the clothespins in chorus. You are only little wooden things, said the Wind. I am strong and powerful and can do just exactly as I like. Now, the fairies saw that the clothespins were doing their work so well that they thought they would like to help them. So they all perched on the line and began to sing. Hi ho, let the north wind blow. The clothespins and we will certainly see that the clothes will stay here. The day's nice and clear, the sun's good and strong, and the wind is quite wrong to try such a trick, but the clothespins will stick. The clothespins did stick to the line, and the fairies helped them, singing all the time. The wind kept on blowing and tried his hardest to get the better of the fairies, but he had no luck at all, and the clothespins won. End of Naughty Wind. Read by stepheather, 13th of January 2025, Bangalore, India. The Rhyming Years by Mary Graham Bonner. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Rhyming Years. Well, said the Old Year, I am going to make up a poem about myself. I feel quite poetical. And, said the New Year, I will too. For the New Year didn't want to have the Old Year think that he was unable to do anything like that, even though he was young. But he felt very much pleased when the Old Year said, Though I have lived 12 whole months, I have not become a poet. I think age should be given the right to speak first, said the New Year. The Old Year shook his white hair and smiled so that the wrinkles in his face all ran in together. This is what he said. Yes, it is true I was feeling old. Yes, it is true I was also cold. Yes, it is true I heard them cheer, welcoming in the glad New Year. Then New Year recited this verse. Of course, you see, I was out for fun. My life has only just begun. They said, he is young and full of vim. No one can help but welcome him. You mustn't think I'm conceited, he added. I say a lot to make my rhyme come out right. Of course, said the Old Year, for I do too. Well, I will give my second verse. Don't believe it all, though. Then the Old Year took an old harp he had, and he began to play and sing, and this is what he sang. And poor Old Year, he almost wept as he packed up his things and left. But as he turned to say goodbye, something in him made him cry, Though my work is mostly done, I have, too, had lots of fun, and ere I go upon my way, this I certainly would say, Happy New Year, big and small, Happy New Year, short and tall, Happy New Year, everyone, may you all have lots of fun. End of The Rhyming Years. Read by stepheather, 13th January 2025, Bangalore, India.
The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there, over the grass, stood beautiful flowers like stars. And there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here!" they cried to each other. One day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish org, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it and put up a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high walls when their lessons were over, and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten his garden," they cried, "so we will live here all the year round." The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down, said the giant. And then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed looking out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they had covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. Only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branch down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish have I been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done, so he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went out in the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to the market, at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he said. "The boy I put into the tree." The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. "We don't know," answered the children. "He has gone away." "You must tell him to be sure, and come here tomorrow," said the giant. But the children said that they did not know where he lived, and had never seen him before, and the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon, when school was over, the children came and played with the giant, but the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend, and often spoke of him. "How would I like to see him?" he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about any more. So he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games, and admired his garden. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." One winter morning he looked out his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, but he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder, and looked and looked. It was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them. And underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass and came near to the child, and when he came quite close his face grew red with anger, and he said, "Who hath dared to wound thee?" For on the palm of the child's hand were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet. "Who hath dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant, and a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant, and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the little child ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. End of The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Read by LucyLou.
The Tale of Two Bad Mice by Beatrix Potter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time there was a very beautiful doll's house. It was red brick with white windows, and it had real muslin curtains and a front door and a chimney. It belonged to 2 dolls called Lucinda and Jane. At least, it belonged to Lucinda, but she never ordered meals. Jane was the cook, but she never did any cooking, because the dinner had been bought ready-made in a box full of shavings. There were 2 red lobsters, and a ham, a fish, a pudding, and some pears and oranges. They would not come off the plates, but they were extremely beautiful. One morning, Lucinda and Jane had gone out for a drive in the doll's perambulator. There was no one in the nursery, and it was very quiet. Presently, there was a little scuffling, scratching noise in a corner near the fireplace, where there was a hole under the skirting board. Tom Thumb put out his head for a moment, and then popped it in again. Tom Thumb was a mouse. A minute afterwards, Hunca Munca, his wife, put her head out too, and when she saw that there was no one in the nursery, she ventured out on the oilcloth under the coal box. The doll's house stood at the other side of the fireplace. Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca went cautiously across the hearthrug. They pushed the front door. It was not fast. Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca went upstairs and peeped into the dining room. Then they squeaked with joy. Such a lovely dinner was laid out upon the table. There were tin spoons and lead knives and forks, and 2 dolly chairs, all so convenient. Tom Thumb set to work at once to carve the ham. It was a beautiful shiny yellow streaked with red. The knife crumpled up and hurt him. He put his finger in his mouth. "It is not boiled enough. It is hard. You have a try, Hunca Munca." Hunca Munca stood up in her chair and chopped at the ham with another lead knife. "It's as hard as the hams at the cheesemonger's," said Hunca Munca. The ham broke off the plate with a jerk and rolled under the table. "Let it alone," said Tom Thumb. "Give me some fish, Hunca Munca." Hunca Munca tried every tin spoon in turn. The fish was glued to the dish. Then Tom Thumb lost his temper. He put the ham in the middle of the floor and hit it with the tongs and with the shovel. Bang, bang, smash, smash. The ham flew all into pieces, for underneath the shiny paint it was made of nothing but plaster. Then there was no end to the rage and disappointment of Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca. They broke up the pudding, the lobsters, the pears, and the oranges. As the fish would not come off the plate, they put it into the red-hot crinkly paper fire in the kitchen, but it would not burn either. Tom Thumb went up the kitchen chimney and looked out at the top. There was no soot. While Tom Thumb was up the chimney, Hunca Munca had another disappointment. She found some tiny canisters upon the dresser, labeled rice, coffee, sago, but when she turned them upside down, there was nothing inside except red and blue beads. Then those mice set to work to do all the mischief they could, especially Tom Thumb. He took Jane's clothes out of the chest of drawers in her bedroom, and he threw them out of the top floor window. But Hunca Munca had a frugal mind. After pulling half the feathers out of Lucinda's bolster, she remembered that she herself was in want of a feather bed. With Tom Thumb's assistance, she carried the bolster downstairs and across the hearth rug. It was difficult to squeeze the bolster into the mouse hole, but they managed it somehow. Then Hunca Munca went back and fetched a chair, a bookcase, a birdcage, and several small odds and ends. The bookcase and the birdcage refused to go into the mouse hole. Hunca Munca left them behind the coal box and went to fetch a cradle. Hunca Munca was just returning with another chair when suddenly there was a noise of talking outside upon the landing. The mice rushed back to their hole and the dolls came into the nursery. What a sight met the eyes of Jane and Lucinda! Lucinda sat upon the upset kitchen stove and stared, and Jane leant against the kitchen dresser and smiled, but neither of them made any remark. The bookcase and the birdcage were rescued from under the coal box, but Hunca Munca has got the cradle and some of Lucinda's clothes. She also has some useful pots and pans and several other things. The little girl that the doll's house belonged to said, "I will get a doll dressed like a policeman." But the nurse said, "I will set a mouse trap." So that is the story of the two bad mice. But they were not so very, very naughty after all, because Tom Thumb paid for everything he broke. He found a crooked sixpence under the hearthrug, and upon Christmas Eve, he and Hunca Munca stuffed it into one of the stockings of Lucinda and Jane. And very early every morning, before anybody is awake, Hunca Munca comes with her dustpan and her broom to sweep the dolly's house. The end. End of The Tale of Two Bad Mice by Beatrix Potter. Read by Kathryn Barbosa.
"10 Kittens" by G.A. Puckett. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Preface. The stories of the 10 kittens told in this book are true to life. They have been gathered from here and there over the country. All the kittens have lived and played their little parts in the life history as told in each chapter. The purpose of this collection of stories is to create more interest and love for kittens on the part of our boys and girls. If these stories help someone to be kinder to little kittens, then the author's purpose will not have been in vain. G.A.P. Mac. The story of Mac begins in a rescue league in Albany, New York, where he was born. The story was very interesting to me as the lady who owned Mac told me about him. I will try to tell you about the unusual circumstances in this kitten's life. Mac was a tiger Persian kitten, but was afflicted with a disease called mange when he was very small. His mother had a very bad case of the mange, but instead of being cruelly treated, her mistress took her to the rescue league where she could be well cared for. While under treatment in this league, which was a home for sick, afflicted, and homeless kittens, Mac was born. A short time after his birth, he and his brothers and sisters became afflicted with the disease of the mother. When Mac was 6 weeks old, the mother and all the kittens, excepting Mac, were chloroformed because of their awful condition with the disease. Mac was left an orphan kitten with no home but the quarters of the rescue league. One day a kind lady went to this league, and from all the kittens there she selected Mac to go and live in her home. This was very kind of the lady because Mac needed a home. Let us not forget this example when we see a homeless or hungry kitten. It would be easy for many people to make kittens happy in this way. The lady who took Mac had a little daughter who became attached to the kitten, and in a few weeks they were the best of friends. By the time Mac was 1 year old, he had learned many tricks and was very obedient. When he wanted someone to open the door, he would stand on his hind feet and put both front feet around the doorknob and try to open the door or attract attention. It was a good thing that Mac learned to do this. One night he was left in the kitchen to sleep. The little girl of the home, Mac's little mistress, was asleep in another room which opened into the kitchen. About 2 o'clock that night, the girl's mother heard Mac rattling the doorknob and meowing with all his might. She knew that something was wrong, so she went to the kitchen to see why he was calling so much. When she opened the door, she saw that the kitchen was on fire, and the blaze had almost reached the door of the little girl's room where Mac was calling for help. His fur was scorched a little, but he was not seriously burned. The mother said that 5 minutes more and the blaze would have been beyond control and would have made its way into the little girl's bedroom. She feels that Mac saved her daughter's life by calling for her to open the door. When the lady and her daughter moved from Albany, New York to Chicago, they did not leave Mac behind. He moved with them as one of the family and lived for a long time in a boarding house in the big city. There are so many kittens that do not get to travel over the country. Neither do they get to live in boarding houses. Almost any kitten is satisfied to have a good place to sleep and plenty to eat. There is another thing most kittens like, and that is kind treatment. They like to be petted and loved as well as being cared for with home and food. After leaving Chicago, Mac moved to Kansas City with his kind mistress. For some time he lived in the city, but at last he moved to Maple Park, just east of the city on the Interurban line, to Excelsior Springs. It was there he lived and spent many happy days. Out there in the open, away from the crowded streets of the big cities, Mac caught grasshoppers as his favorite pastime in the fields. This he enjoyed very much, and it was also good exercise for him. When the lady's husband would sit down to read the evening paper in the big Morris chair, Mac would always sleep on one of the arms of the chair. At meal times he would sit in a high chair at the table and eat just what was given to him. He would not offer to get on the table nor bother anything in the kitchen. One day another kitten came into the home to live, but he was not so careful to keep out of the food not intended for him. When he would try to get into anything or stand up against the cabinet or table, Mac would box his ears and make him get away. Mac had been trained from his baby days to keep off the table or cabinet and to keep out of food which did not belong to him. The years passed by in Mac's life until he became a very old cat. He never forgot his early training and the many little tricks which he had been taught to do. Of course, his mistress thought more of him after he saved the little girl from the fire, but he always had a favorite place in everything. At the ripe old age of 14 years, Mac died. His life had been useful, and he had been kind and obedient through all the years. It was a sad day in the home when Mac died. The whole family went to his burial. He was buried at Maple Park in a little grave over which many tears were shed. He was loved by all and had helped to make life brighter with the life which he had lived. A beautiful and obedient cat was laid to rest. Snooks. Snooks was a very small kitten and lived in a preacher's home. He was well liked by the children in the home. One day one of the girls became very ill, and for weeks everyone had to be very quiet. The kitten liked to be in the house and romp with the children, but during those weeks of sickness he had to stay outdoors. One day a young man called at the house on an errand, and as he turned to leave, he noticed the kitten asleep in a chair on the front porch. He told one of the children that he would like to have the little ball of gray and blue, and to his surprise, the little girl gave it to him. The first ride the kitten ever had in an automobile was that afternoon when the young man started home with the little gift. Kittens do not like to ride as dogs do, so this kitten was afraid and had to be kept from jumping out while the car was running. The kitten soon made friends in the new home and was named Snooks. This name was given him by his new mistress because a little pet chicken she once had was named Snooks. He was trained in many ways during the early months in this new home and could be trusted alone in the house, for he would not climb upon the table or bother anything. Nearly all kittens are afraid of water, but Snooks likes to get into it and play by splashing it with his feet. He also likes to take a bath, for he will not offer to scratch or bite, but stands in the bathtub while his mistress washes him. Sometime during each day, Snooks has a big romp from room to room. He has learned to run fast and then jump on little rugs and slide on the floor. Many times a day, these rugs have to be straightened and put back into place. On cold nights, he is allowed to sleep in the house on a little bed which is all his own. This he greatly enjoys. But little does he realize that many poor kittens which have no homes have to sleep out in the cold. Many times they go to bed on the cold ground and their little ears freeze because they cannot keep warm. One of the greatest delights of this kitten is to play with a little rubber ball which was bought for him. He will chase it from room to room like playing with a mouse. He makes it roll by striking it with his feet or jumping at it. One day the ball rolled under the pantry door, and the mistress heard Snooks meowing, but did not go see to what he wanted. Soon he came to the living room and meowed again, and then started back towards the kitchen, still meowing. The mistress followed, and Snooks led her to the door of the pantry and looked under as much as to say, "I have lost the little ball. Will you get it for me?" She opened the door and found the ball, and the kitten went on playing again, perfectly satisfied. On another day a Victrola was brought into the house where Snooks lives, and at first he was afraid of the music, but soon showed signs of interest. He would sit and listen and liked to watch the records go round and round. He would walk all around the machine, smelling and looking as though trying to find where the music and voices were coming from. At this writing, Snooks, the little blue and gray kitten, is alive and well. He lives in a college town, but has never gone to college. He is satisfied to eat 3 times a day, and every day he plays with the little ball which he enjoys so much. He is now about 1 year old, and is going to be a large cat when grown. Let us hope that he will always have a good home and be well and playful. Dump. This is a very peculiar name for a kitten, but kittens often have peculiar names. Dump could not be called a beautiful kitten, but his good nature and playfulness made him attractive and likable. His mother must have thought him pretty, for she petted him so much by smoothing his fur with her tongue. I have not yet told you the color of this kitten, and I'm sure you're wondering about it. You might say he was very pretty. His fur was a bluish gray and white, and his face was white almost all over. He was just a common kitten, but you know the common kittens are smart and many times as good in disposition as the thoroughbreds. Dump was very playful and would do many cute things. One thing that he did and seemed to like most of all was playing hide and seek in the house. He would get behind the door and wait for his little mistress to come, and then he would jump out at her as though he meant to frighten her. Of course, she had jumped at him in the same way many times, and in this way had taught him the game of hide and seek. One afternoon in the summertime, the little girl thought of something to do of which Dump had not thought. It was this. The girl had a nice little kodak which her uncle had given her, and she thought of taking Dump's picture. Not very many kittens are fortunate enough to have their pictures taken. The little kitten had never posed for a picture, and of course thought it was great fun, that is, if he thought of it at all. Anyway, they both went into the yard, and the little girl placed Dump on the gatepost. He seemed to know the purpose of being placed there, for he sat still in the warm sun, just like he was really posing for the picture. It was a good picture, too, and the girl has the little picture yet, although she is grown now and has a home of her own, and another kitten takes Dump's place. Dump always slept in the window during the summer between the screen and curtains. He would always answer his little mistress with a little meow when she called him. He knew when it was time for his meals, as his master worked downtown in a meat shop, and when he would go to the house for his meals, Dump would meet him at the door and beg for meat. When the yard was mowed and the grass piled up in one big pile, the kitten would run to it and hide himself from his little mistress. This was great fun for both. They loved each other very much, and where one went around the yard or in the house, the other was to be found too. Dump never cared to play with other kittens and would not be very friendly. One of the neighbors had a big cat next door, but Dump would never let him come through the yard fence if he saw him. He must have been a little selfish, but probably it was because he loved his mistress more than other kittens. Many times Dump would go to the woodshed and watch for mice. He nearly always caught one, and he loved to play with it for hours at a time before eating it. One hot summer day he played too long, and it cost him his life, for he became overheated and died in just a little while. The little girl did everything she could for him, but could not save his life. Dump's little body was buried back of the cave beside the graves of 2 little bantam chickens and a little goldfish. Mitch. Mitch was a beautiful Persian kitten and lived in Kansas City, Missouri. City kittens do not have such large playgrounds as kittens on the farm, for many times they are kept in the house almost all the time. There are many dangers for kittens outside in the big cities, too. Someone may steal them and take them away from their homes, or they may get run over by the cars and big trucks. A little girl whose name was Mitchell gave the kittens to the lady who told me this story. The family called him Mitchie for a while after the name Mitchell. Some of them thought that name too long, so they shortened it to Mitch, and that became the name of this beautiful Persian kitten. The mistress kept a large fruit basket on the dining table, and when there was no fruit in it, Mitch used it for a bed. He learned to run towards the table, and with one jump he would land right in the basket. Then he would curl up for a long nap and be perfectly satisfied for hours. He always liked to get into boxes, and when the dresser drawers were left open he would get into them. It did not make much difference to Mitch just what it was for. He could feel contented in anything. One day a member of the family brought something home in a paper sack, and taking the articles out, laid the sack on the bed. In a few minutes Mitch was curled up in the sack, fast asleep. The lady's husband worked at night, or about half the night, and when he came home about midnight, Mitch would always meet him at the head of the stairs, ready for a romp. He loved to play with the man's watch chain, but one day it was a costly play. The watch was left on the dresser with the chain hanging over the edge, and Mitch decided to romp with it a little while. Of course, he did not know the watch might fall and break. In some ways, he got his claws fastened in the chain and jerked the watch to the floor. Mitch did not mean to break the watch, but it cost about $7 to have it repaired. Mitch could not repair the broken watch, and he had no way of paying the debt except by love and affection for his master. Mitch was like Snooks in the other story. He liked water and liked to play in it. He was very careful about keeping clean and would go to the lavatory and put his feet in the water and then wash his face. One faucet in the bathtub leaked a little, and Mitch found that he could get a drink there. In some ways, he learned that he could strike the faucet with his feet and turn on more water. One day, some member of the family had prepared a half tub of water for a bath, and about the same time Mitch decided that he wanted a drink. He went to the bathtub and, as usual, jumped right over into the tub, but this time he landed in all the water. You should have seen him scramble to get out, for he was terribly frightened. One day the lady and her husband moved away from the city to the farm, and of course Mitch went along and became a country kitten. I am sure that he liked to be on the farm where he could get out into the big outdoors and catch lots of mice. About a year passed and the family moved back to the city, but Mitch was left on the farm with the family who moved on the place. Evidently he did not like his new friends, or else decided to go back to the city, for he disappeared one afternoon and has not been heard of since. If you should see Mitch anywhere, it would be kind of you to tell him that the fruit basket is on the table in the city waiting for him. His mistress, too, will be very glad to hear from him or have him return to his former home. Thomas. Thomas is another very peculiar name for a kitten. He was a groceryman by trade, as he lived in a grocery store for 17 years. Like so many kittens, Thomas was a stray that came to the store in search of food. The proprietors of the store, 2 brothers, were kind to hungry and friendless kittens. They allowed this kitten to live in the store, and not many days after he arrived, they named him Thomas. At night, he slept in the basement of the store. He kept the store free from mice, as he was a good mouser. He was well cared for, too, as he had plenty to eat of everything that he liked which the store furnished. Because of kind treatment and plenty to eat, the kitten grew very rapidly and made a large cat when fully grown. Many months before his death he weighed 13 or 14 pounds and was always fat and sleek. So many poor wretched cats that have no home could be more like Thomas if people would give them a home and treat them kindly. A kind deed, though done for a kitten, is not thrown away. Thomas had a favorite place to sit, which was on one of the counters near the front window of the store. In this way he made many friends. He was of a lovable disposition and kind to everyone. He could have numbered these friends by the score, as all the customers had a kind word or pat for him. Many people would stop at the window and look at him because he was so large and beautiful. His fur was gray and striped, and he made a very pretty ornament as well as a good advertisement for the store. The playground for Thomas was in the basement of the store building. He had many a romp there, but one romp cost him his beautiful gray coat. Near the basement stairs there was a large oil can or tank that had a large top which could be removed when the tank was filled with oil. One of the employees had left this top off, and Thomas stepped into the hole while walking across the tank. The tank of coal oil did not make a very good swimming pool nor bathtub. It was lucky for Thomas that he got out alive. But oil caused all the fur to come off his body, and this left him without a coat. The only fur left was a little at the end of his tail. Someone said that his smooth body looked like that of an elephant. Thomas was ashamed of this condition and would not appear in the main room of the store. His meals had to be taken to the basement for him, and even then he would not come into the light any more than necessary. For 3 or 4 weeks he remained in the dark corners of the basement until a new coat of fur was well started. The new coat was even brighter and prettier than the old one, so Thomas did not lose so much after all. One of the brothers of the store seemed to be more attached to Thomas than the other. The cat noticed this and showed his appreciation in many ways. When this brother would go to his meals, Thomas would get on the front counter and watch and wait for him to return. He could see up the street for a whole block the way his kind master would return, and he would watch him all the way. For 17 years Thomas lived in the grocery store after being taken in as a homeless kitten. The men who owned the store never regretted that they had shown kindness to a dumb animal and furnished a home for a cat that had many times repaid them for all the care and expense he had been to them. Many new friends and acquaintances had been made because of Thomas on the front counter. New customers had been added to the already long list. The store contained no mice to disturb anything, and everyone seemed happy because Thomas was always happy. During all those years, he never spent more than 2 nights outside the store building. He always attended to his own business and was satisfied to stay at home and romp in the basement playground. At last he died of old age, and for many weeks afterward people would look on the counter for the old friend of former days. There were many regrets expressed when the news went out that Thomas was dead. A life of good fellowship and love had not been lived in vain. Tiger. Perhaps you have read or heard of tramp kittens. Sometimes they are called little beggars. No doubt you have seen such kittens along the roads or on the streets. Sometimes they will go for miles in search of food and home. In cities and towns they will go from house to house or to the stores in search of scraps of food to eat. Many times these kittens are afraid of boys and girls because they have been abused and often driven away with rocks and clubs, but they would like to be treated kindly. Tiger was one of these tramp kittens in his young days. He had been cast out from his home as an undesirable kitten. Days and nights he wandered around in the town in which he had been left, but no one seemed to care for a homeless kitten. Sometimes he was able to find enough to eat, but many nights he slept in an alley, cold and hungry. One morning this tramp kitten was sitting on the back porch of a drugstore, very hungry. His little body was wasting away. While sitting in the warm sunshine on the porch, he went to sleep, but was soon awakened by someone opening the back door. Instead of being kicked off the porch with a warning not to return, he was surprised to hear kind words and to feel a warm hand stroking his dirty fur. The kind words and tender strokes came from a young boy whose name was Frank and whose father owned the store. In a few minutes Frank had a little bed arranged by the stove in the store, and the tramp kitten was soon fast asleep. A little later he was awakened by Frank, who had brought scraps of meat from the meat shop, and this the hungry kitten enjoyed very much. When Frank's father came in that morning, he was led back to the stove where the kitten was sleeping and asked if it might live in the store. The father consented, and by noon the little boy and the little beggar kitten had made friends for life. "I am going to name him Tiger," said Frank that evening as he was telling his mother of the new-found friend. "Why name him Tiger, Frank?" asked his mother. "Because he looks like a tiger," answered Frank. "His body has stripes all over it, just like the pictures of tigers in my books." As the months rolled by, Tiger became more and more at home in the store. His little master fed him every day, and soon he was fat and sleek. He grew very fast and became the pet of the store force. He was taught many tricks, and it seemed that he always tried to do what he was told. By Frank's continual training, Tiger became a little circus performer. Frank would clasp both hands and then hold out his arms in front of him, forming a circle through which Tiger would jump back and forth. Another thing which attracted much attention from the employees and customers was that Tiger would try to get into any kind of box left open or set out for him. He never forgot this, and after becoming a full-grown cat, he would try to get into little boxes. Sometimes Frank or one of the clerks would give him a small pasteboard box and tell him to lie down in it. He would turn round and round in it until the sides were mashed, and then he would lie down on the flat piece of the box. Sometimes they would give him a very small pillbox, and he would try to get into it. He would walk all around it and at last would lie down on top of it. As the years went by, Tiger became the pet of all who knew him. His master grew to be a young man, but the close friendship with the kitten always existed. Tiger never failed to receive good meals and kind treatment. One evening while Tiger was lying in the alley, one of the clerks called him, but he would not answer. The man almost had to whip him to get back into the store. This was very unusual. The clerk noticed the changed attitude and spoke to others about it. During the night the fire alarm was given, and news soon spread that the drugstore was burning. Frank thought first of Tiger and of his desire to remain outside the store that evening. The firemen arrived too late to enter the building, although it was not entirely destroyed. The next day Tiger was found on top of the office desk near a rear window. He had suffocated in the smoke, but the flames had not touched his body. Such was the end of life for the obedient and faithful Tiger. Sammy. It is very interesting to know why pets are called the same names as people. Not only cats and dogs, but birds, horses, cows, and other pets are given the names of people. Many times these names are given because of fondness for the pets and love for those after whom they are named. The lady who told me this story of Sammy also told me why she called him this name. She had met a very attractive young man while visiting in another town, and when she came home she did not forget the new acquaintance. And a few days after she returned from the visit, someone gave her a little kitten which she named Sammy for him. She never learned whether the young man felt honored because of this, but the kitten was well cared for. Sammy was a beautiful Maltese kitten, but his young mistress did not know where he was born, nor anything about his mother, sisters, nor brothers. He seemed like an orphan kitten, and was given the best of care. In a little while he was satisfied in the new home and seemed to be perfectly happy. As the months rolled by, Sammy and his mistress became very fond of each other. One day something happened which changed the course of events. The young lady made another acquaintance, this time of a young man who had gone into business in her hometown. Sammy was afraid of all strangers and would not play with any of the boys in the neighborhood and would not make friends with any of the young men who called on his mistress. When the nice-looking businessman began visiting the young lady, Sammy also became acquainted with him. From the first visit he seemed to like the new acquaintance, and soon they were close friends. When the young man called at the home, Sammy would always meet him at the gate and accompany him to the door. When his mistress would allow him to do so, he would go into the house so that the young man might pet him. Sammy was never trained to catch mice, and was never given one to eat. It is often a good thing to have a cat that will catch mice, but sometimes it proves very fatal, as mice are often poisoned and thrown out or die where the kittens can find them. Sammy was not allowed to eat meat either, especially raw meat. Feeding raw meat has proven very costly to many valuable cats, as it has made them of vicious or cross disposition. The mistress of Sammy was very careful to cultivate in him a kind and obedient disposition. In the yard of the home there was an old tree in which Sammy spent many happy hours in the warm sunshine. Not many feet from the ground the tree forked, and this made a very desirable place to get out of the reach of dogs and to rest or sleep. This had been a favorite resting place for Trilby, a kitten that lived in the home long before Sammy was born. The lady said that both kittens had used the old tree for a resting place, and that she had often regretted that she had not taken their pictures. I am sorry, too, as I would like to have shown you the picture of Sammy in this book, but we will have to imagine how peaceful he was as he slept in the warm sunshine. One beautiful autumn day in September, the young man whom Sammy loved and who had been going to the home very often, went to take Sammy's mistress away. Sammy was pleased to have the young man there, although he did not understand why so many people were there and what it all meant. A few days after the couple were married, they moved to a little cottage in another part of town and took Sammy along to live with them. In this new home he seemed perfectly satisfied and never tried to go back to the old home again. He spent many happy days in this home, and every evening he would go down the street to meet his new mistress. The young couple became very much attached to Sammy and gave him the best place in almost everything. Have you ever heard of a spoiled kitten? Sammy was like some children who were allowed to have their way, for he became a spoiled kitten later in life. On another day, many months after the beautiful autumn wedding day, a little baby came into the home to live. Sammy did not know what to think of a baby crying and to see everyone making over the new daughter. In those days he felt somewhat neglected, as he was not petted as much as usual, but he soon became attached to the little one in the crib. He seemed to love the baby as much as anyone else, and at last he became so jealous that he would try to protect her when anyone would lift her from the crib. He would almost fight the young father and mother to keep them away, as he seemed to think that they should not fondle her. He must have been afraid that they would hurt his little playmate, although the baby never got to play with Sammy except to coo at him from the crib. He became so cross and so jealous that he had to be given away. The father saw a man in town one day who lived in the country, and he told this man about Sammy, and of how good he had been until he became jealous of the baby. Sammy was given to this man, and he went to live on a farm. I have wondered how much he missed the baby, but probably the farm life attracted his attention so much that he did not grieve very long over the change. He lived to be 7 or 8 years old, and proved to be a valuable cat on the farm. He never got to see his little baby mistress again, but after she grew older, she was told of Sammy's fondness for her. She is now 3 or 4 years older than Sammy was when he died, but of course she can remember nothing about him except as the parents have told her. Sammy is buried on a farm not far from Liberty, Missouri, and those who knew and loved him will never forget the story of his life. Betty. Betty is of the Persian breed of cats like Mitch and Mac in 2 other stories of this book. She lives at Wynwood Lake, just east of Kansas City, and has a good home and a kind mistress. She is of a lovable disposition. Her father is the famous White Czar of Kansas City, and her mother is of good stock. Betty has not traveled over the country like Mac in the other story, but she is satisfied to live in a comfortable home with her mistress. She has no time for traveling anyway, because she has to be at home with her family of kittens. I am not sure she is perfectly satisfied, though, because 3 of her kittens are far from home today. The day that Betty's first babies were born was very gloomy, and by night a storm was gathering, which broke from the clouds in all of its fury later in the night. The trees were howling in the wind, and the thunder and lightning caused Betty and her mistress much fear. The lady had gone to bed that night before the storm came on, and Betty was in the corner of the room with her new babies. When the noise of the storm was heard, Betty ran to the bed, but in a few seconds went back to the box to be with the kittens. She kept this up, going back and forth for several minutes. At last the lady told her to bring the kittens to the bed. It seemed that she knew what her mistress had said, for she went to the box in the corner 3 times, each time taking a kitten to the bed. After 3 kittens had been placed on the bed, Betty took a long breath and seemed almost exhausted by jumping back and forth so many times. The lady told her that she had left 1 kitten in the box, so again she went to the corner, this time getting the 4th kitten. After a second attempt, she jumped upon the bed and then cuddled down to sleep regardless of the raging storm. She had been used to sleeping on the bed, but was not satisfied to sleep there that night and leave the 4 kittens in the box in the corner of the room. This act of Betty's showed the mother love for her babies. The 4 kittens grew to be beautiful pets. There were 3 brothers and 1 sister in Betty's families. One of the brothers was taken to the state of Michigan, and one was sent to Abilene, Kansas. The 3rd brother, named Jack, went to France with a captain and his wife during the war. Only this one of the brothers went to war. It seemed that it would be right for Betty to have a blue star for Jack. The sister, Bluebell, is still at home with her mother. The father of Bluebell and the 3 brothers is Blue-Eyed Billy, another famous cat of Kansas City. Bluebell is not alone now because Betty has 2 more babies in the home. The father of these 2 younger kittens is called John, and he seems to love them as much as Betty does. He will get into the box and watch their faces just like the mother cat. Betty does not forget Bluebell as her first baby. She is almost 2 years old now, but Betty washes her face and ears every day, just like she did when Bluebell was a little kitten. Betty is very fond of going down to the lake and catching crawfish for the kittens. She will sit near the water until a crawfish comes in sight near the edge, and then with one grab she has it. She always catches them by the back so they cannot pinch her with their sharp pincers. Another of her favorite pastimes is gathering the eggs. Betty goes with her mistress every morning and looks into all the nests. If she finds eggs in the nest, she will wait until her mistress takes them out. If she looks into a nest and finds no eggs, she goes on to the next. In this way, Betty helps her mistress every evening. Betty always knows when Saturday comes because her mistress goes to town on that day. Betty expects a treat of good meat on Saturday. When the lady gets home from town, Betty always goes to the handbag and smells for meat. If she finds none, she will go back to her box and lie down, greatly disappointed. If she smells the meat, then she sits upon her hind leg begging for it, and is not satisfied until she and the kittens have the special Saturday treat. When the lady goes to the mailbox for mail, Betty always desires to go along. She climbs the post and looks into the box when her mistress opens it, but she has never learned to carry the mail to the house. Betty still lives at Winwood Lake, and with the help of John, she is carefully rearing a family of 3 beautiful and obedient kittens. Jimmy. Jimmy was a drugstore cat, following the same occupation as Tiger in the story called Tiger. One of the clerks in the store found him in the alley one morning while burning some old boxes. The kitten was poor and hungry and seemed to be homeless and friendless. He was a stranger in the neighborhood, and no one ever came to the store to claim him. He was lost and lonesome when picked up and seemed very glad to find a friend. He was only a stray kitten, and no one knew of his mother nor where he was born. This seems sad, but with Jimmy it gave him a distinguished place later in life, which I will tell you about in this story. In a little while, Jimmy was growing and happy in the new home. He had made friends with all of the clerks in the store, and especially with the proprietor. They became devoted friends for life. Even money could not separate them, as a large sum was offered for him, but his master loved him more than money. Some of the clerks taught him to jump through hoops or through their arms or over their feet. On one of the counters in the drugstore there was a large clock which became the resting place for Jimmy. When told to go and get on the clock, he would obey instantly and then look around at those watching him as though he was proud of the feat. One day his master took a picture of him as he sat on the clock, and he seemed to pose for it. The picture is now in the desk of the drugstore, although Jimmy has been dead for 3 years. When I asked Jimmy's master for the facts about the story, he turned to the desk and showed me the picture. While we were speaking of the kitten's life, a man came into the room who used to know and love Jimmy. He was asked if he knew the picture, and when we looked at it, he exclaimed, "That's Jimmy." This shows how much he was loved and that he was well known. Like Thomas of the grocery store in the other story, Jimmy had scores of friends and is remembered by many citizens in the town in which he lived. During one of the cat shows in Convention Hall in Kansas City a few years ago, Jimmy was also on exhibition. He attracted much attention, although he was not a thoroughbred and was only a stray. His fur was striped like a tiger, and in the show he received first prize as the best tiger cat shown. He also won first prize as a stray, but to receive the premium his master had to take 3 witnesses before a notary public and make affidavit that Jimmy was found in the alley and that no one knew of his birth or his pedigree. After receiving these prizes, Jimmy's master thought more of him than ever. He attracted much attention in his hometown, too, when the news went out that Jimmy had won first at Tiger and Stray. New friends went to the store to see him, and he, too, became a good advertisement for the store. One day a physician's wife from another town went into the drugstore and saw Jimmy sitting on the old clock. She soon made his acquaintance and became attached to him. She was a lover of kittens, and Jimmy, so large and beautiful, seemed to her an ideal kitten. She asked all about him, of his birth, pedigree, disposition, and many other questions. When told that he was only a stray, picked up in an alley as a homeless kitten, she seemed to think more of him than ever. Perhaps she had been kind to some homeless kittens sometime in the past and understood what it meant to care for one that needed a friend. She was anxious to have him as her own and let him live in her own home. I am sure that she would have given him the best of care and that he would have had a good home in which to spend his old age. In a few days, the woman's husband was in the town and went to the store and offered $25 for Jimmy. The proprietor would not sell him for that, and then the physician offered him $50. But Jimmy's master said that money could not buy him. Such was the love for a kitten that had been so kind and obedient during the many years in the store. About 2 weeks after the physician had offered the $50 for him, Jimmy in some way got hold of poison and died. He was 9 years old at the time of his death and left many friends who have greatly missed him during these past 3 years. Pete. To get the story of Pete, I had to go to a large hotel, and there I found an old gentleman who had lost his wife by death about a year before, and who seemed lonely for her presence. He told all that he could about Pete, but said, if she were only here, pointing to a picture on the wall, she could tell you a fine story of this kitten. She loved cats as no one else on earth, I suppose, he continued. Such deeds are not thrown away either, although I used to think many of them were unnecessary. One morning, while the good wife was living, they lost their last kitten, and she said that they would not try to raise or care for any more. That same morning, Pete arrived at the back door of the home and begged for something to eat. He was invited inside, and that was all that was necessary to make friends between the lady and the homeless kitten. Pete was not so young either at the time, for he seemed to be nearly 2 years old. The gentleman said that there never was a cat that could fight like Pete. He was not afraid of anything that walked and could whip any dog that ever came into the yard. When he made up his mind that he did not want any dog or certain cats around the house or yard, it was then that they had to leave. He would sometimes make up with the cat after giving him a good flogging if the cat was willing to stay long enough to make up. He was an awful fighter, and yet he was of a good disposition around the home. Of all the kittens this lady had and loved and cared for, there was none so lovable and of a better character than Pete. If it had not been for his fighting nature, he would have been an ideal cat in every way. Perhaps the brave spirit he showed helped him to protect himself from cruel dogs and mean cats. For 10 years, Pete occupied the best chair in the home for his resting place in bed. He had things his own way because he was loved by all the members of the family. His food consisted of anything and everything that money could buy. He lacked for nothing that would make him contented and happy. When baby kittens were born in the neighborhood, Pete was always one of the first visitors and took charge of the kittens along with the mother cat. He would fight for the baby kittens and protect them with his own life. No mother cat was afraid to leave her kittens in charge of Pete because they all knew his daring spirit and courageous nature. After the death of the kind mistress, Pete missed her very much. He missed her loving caresses and the good meals which she always provided for him. Of course, the other members of the family took good care of him then, but the mistress of the home had been the one he had largely depended upon. She would get up any time in the night and let him in if he came to the door and called. If he was not in the house at supper time, a good meal would be placed back for him, and then during the night, if he came to the door, she would let him in and warm his supper for him. All this he greatly missed, although he was well taken care of. Today he lives in a boarding school for cats in the city of Chicago and is visited once each week, at least, by a daughter of his former mistress. This daughter loves Pete too, and Pete loves her just as much. When she goes to the boarding place to see him, he will come to her and put both front feet around her neck and try in every way to show his affection. He is now about 14 years old and weighs 16½ pounds. During March of this year, 1919, the old gentleman received a letter from his daughter in Chicago saying that Pete was well and seemingly contented in the boarding school. It cost $2 or $3 a week to keep him there, but this kindness is due him after such faithful service during all the years. End of 10 Kittens by G.A. Puckett, read by Kaitlyn Vanadestine.
The Story of the Three Deaf Men, collected by Mrs. Howard Kingscote and Pandit Natasha Sastry. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Story of the Three Deaf Men. When any awkward blunder occurs from a person acting under a mistaken notion, there is a common proverb in Tamil to the effect that the matter ended like the story of the 3 deaf men. Muche vidan kadaye mudandaru. The following is the story told to explain the illusion. In a remote village there lived a husband and wife. Both of them were quite deaf. They had made this household arrangement, namely, to cook cabbage with tamarind and soup without tamarind one day, and cabbage without tamarind and soup with tamarind on the other. Thus, on every alternate day, the same dishes were repeated. One day, when taking his meal, the husband found the tamarind cabbage so very tasty that he wanted to have it also next day, and gave instructions to that effect. The deaf wife did not understand the order. According to the established rule, she cooked cabbage without tamarind next day. The husband, when he sat down to his meal, found his order disregarded, and, being enraged thereat, threw the cabbage against the wall and went out in a rage. The wife ate her fill and prepared tamarind cabbage for her husband. The husband went out and sat down in a place where 3 roads crossed to calm down his anger. At that time a shepherd happened to pass that way. He had lately lost a good cow and calf of his, and had been seeking them for some days. When he saw the deaf man sitting by the way, he took him for a soothsayer, and asked him to find out by his knowledge of Josham, soothsaying, where the cow was likely to be found. The herdsman, too, was very deaf, and the man, without hearing what he was saying, abused him and wished to be left undisturbed. In abusing him, the husband stretched out his hand, pointing to the shepherd's face. This pointing, the shepherd understood to indicate the direction where the lost cow and calf would be found. Thus thinking, the poor shepherd went on in that direction, promising to present the soothsayer with the calf if he found it there with the cow. To his joy, and by mere chance, he found them. His delight knew no bounds. That is a capital soothsayer. Surely I must present him with the calf. So thought he to himself, and returned with them to the deaf man, and, pointing to the calf, requested him to accept it. Now, it unfortunately happened that the calf's tail was broken and crooked. The man thought the herdsman was blaming him unreasonably for having broken the calf's tail, while he knew nothing about it, and so, by a wave of his hand, denied the charge. This the shepherd mistook for refusal of the calf and a demand for the cow. The shepherd said, "How very greedy you are! I promised you only the calf and not the cow." The husband said, "Never! I know nothing of either your cow or calf. I never broke the calf's tail. Some other must have done it." Thus they quarreled, without understanding each other, for a long time, when a third party happened to pass by. Understanding the cause of the dispute, and desiring to profit by their stupidity, he interfered, and said in a loud voice, and yet so as not to be heard by the deaf husband, "Well, shepherd, you had better go away with the cow. These soothsayers are always greedy. Leave the calf with me, and I shall make him accept it." The shepherd, much pleased to have secured the cow, walked home, leaving the calf with a third person. When the shepherd had gone, the passenger said to the deaf man, "You see how very unlawful it is for the shepherd to charge you with an offense which you never committed. It is always the case with shepherds. They are the biggest fools in the world. But never mind, so long as you have a friend in me, I shall somehow explain to him your innocence and restore the calf to him." The husband, much pleased, ran home to escape from the consequences of supposed guilt. At the expense of the stupidity and deafness of both, the third traveler walked home with the calf. The husband, on his return, sat down to his dinner, and his wife served him the tamarind cabbage. He happened to put his finger to the place where the cabbage without tamarind had previously been served on the leaf. On applying it to his mouth, he found it so very sweet that he demanded that dish again. The wife replied to him that she had already emptied the pan. "Then at least bring me the cabbage that is sticking to the saucepan," said the husband, and the wife did accordingly. Here ends the story. The latter portion is also said to be the explanation of a proverb that is prevalent in Tamil. Sevaru kirayai valichu podudi sunaiketa muli. Meaning, "O thou feelingless, deaf woman, give me at least the cabbage that is sticking to the saucepan." This proverb is applied to stubborn wives who will have their own way and do not obey their husbands submissively in unrefined society. End of the story of the 3 deaf men. Read by stepheather, Bangalore, India, 8th of January 2025.
"12 Wild Geese" by Patrick Kennedy.
From Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry, edited and selected by William B. Yeats. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. There was once a king and queen that lived very happily together, and they had 12 sons and not a single daughter. We are always wishing for what we haven't and don't care for what we have, and so it was with the queen. One day in winter, when the bawn was covered with snow, she was looking out of the parlor window and saw there a calf that was just killed by the butcher, and a raven standing near it. "Oh," says she, "if I had only a daughter with her skin as white as that snow, her cheeks as red as that blood, and her hair as black as that raven, I'd give every one of my 12 sons for her." The moment she said the word, she got a great fright, and a shiver went through her, and in an instant after, a severe-looking old woman stood before her. "That was a wicked wish you made," said she, "and to punish you it will be granted. You will have such a daughter as you desire, but the very day of her birth you will lose your other children." She vanished the moment she said those words. And that very way it turned out. When she expected her delivery, she had her children all in a large room of the palace, with guards all round it. But the very hour her daughter came into the world, the guards inside and outside heard a great whirling and whistling, and the 12 princes were seen flying one after another out through the open window and away like so many arrows over the woods. Well, the king was in great grief for the loss of his sons, and would be very enraged with his wife if he only knew that she was so much to blame for it. Everyone called the little princess Snow White and Rose Red, on account of her beautiful complexion. She was the most loving and lovable child that could be seen anywhere. When she was 12 years old, she began to be very sad and lonely, and to torment her mother, asking her about her brothers that she thought were dead. For none up to that time ever told her the exact thing that happened them. The secret was weighing very heavy on the queen's conscience, and as the little girl persevered in her questions, at last she told her. "Well, mother," said she, "it was on my account my poor brothers were changed into wild geese, and are now suffering all sorts of hardship. Before the world is a day older, I'll be off to seek them, and try to restore them to their own shapes." The king and queen had her well watched, but all was no use. Next night she was getting through the woods that surrounded the palace, and she went on and on that night, until the evening of the next day. She had a few cakes with her, and she got nuts, the mugoreens, fruit of the sweet briar, and some sweet crabs, as she went along. At last she came to a nice wooden house just at sunset. There was a fine garden round it, full of the handsomest flowers, and a gate in the hedge. She went in and saw a table laid out with 12 plates, and 12 knives and forks, and 12 spoons. There were cakes and cold wild fowl, and fruit along with the plates. And there was a good fire, and in another long room there were 12 beds. Well, while she was looking about her, she heard the gate opening, and footsteps along the walk, and in came 12 young men, and there was great grief and surprise on all their faces when they laid eyes on her. "Oh, what misfortune sent you here?" said the eldest. "For the sake of a girl, we were obliged to leave our father's court, and be in the shape of wild geese all day. That's 12 years ago, and we took a solemn oath that we would kill the first young girl that came into our hands. It's a pity to put such an innocent and handsome girl as you are out of the world, but we must keep our oath." "But," said she, "I am your only sister that never knew anything about this till yesterday, and I stole away from our father's and mother's palace last night to find you out and relieve you if I can." Every one of them clasped his hands and looked down at the floor, and you could hear a pin fall till the eldest cried out, "A curse light upon our oath! What shall we do?" "I'll tell you that," said an old woman that appeared at the instant among them. "Break your wicked oath, which no one should keep. If you attempted to lay an uncivil finger on her, I'd change you into 12 bouillon buis, stalks of ragweed. But I wish well to you as well as to her. She is appointed to be your deliverer in this way. She must spin and knit 12 shirts for you out of bog down, to be gathered by her own hands on the moor just outside of the wood. It will take her 5 years to do it, and if she once speaks or laughs or cries the whole time, you will have to remain wild geese by day until you are called out of the world. So take care of your sister. It is worth your while." The fairy then vanished, and it was only a strife with the brothers to see who would be first to kiss and hug their sister. So for 3 long years the poor young princess was occupied pulling bog down, spinning it, and knitting it into shirts. And at the end of the 3 years she had 8 made. During all that time she never spoke a word, nor laughed, nor cried. The last was the hardest to refrain from. One fine day she was sitting in the garden spinning, when in sprung a fine greyhound and bounded up to her, and laid his paws on her shoulder, and licked her forehead and her hair. The next minute a beautiful young prince rode up to the little garden gate, took off his hat, and asked for leave to come in. She gave him a little nod, and in he walked. He made ever so many apologies for intruding, and asked her ever so many questions, but not a word could he get out of her. He loved her so much from the first moment that he could not leave her till he told her that he was king of a country just bordering on the forest, and he begged her to come home with him and be his wife. She couldn't help loving him as much as he did her, and though she shook her head very often and was very sorry to leave her brothers, at last she nodded her head and put her hand in his. She knew well enough that the good fairy and her brothers would be able to find her out. Before she went, she brought out a basket holding all her bog down, and another holding the 8 shirts. The attendants took charge of these, and the prince placed her before him on his horse. The only thing that disturbed him while riding along was the displeasure his stepmother would feel at what he'd done. However, he was full master at home, and as soon as he arrived, he sent for the bishop, got his bride nicely dressed, and the marriage was celebrated, the bride answering by signs. He knew by her manner she was of high birth, and no two could be fonder of each other. The wicked stepmother did all she could to make mischief, saying she was sure that she was only a woodman's daughter, but nothing could disturb the young king's opinion of his wife. In good time the young queen was delivered of a beautiful boy, and the king was so glad he hardly knew what to do for joy. All the grandeur of the christening and the happiness of the parents tormented the bad woman more than I can tell you, and she determined to put a stop to all their comfort. She got a sleeping posset given to the young mother, and while she was thinking how she could best make way with the child, she saw a wicked-looking wolf in the garden looking up at her and licking his chops. She lost no time, but snatched the child from the arms of the sleeping woman and pitched it out. The beast caught it in his mouth and was over the garden fence in a minute. The wicked woman then pricked her own fingers and dabbled the blood round the mouth of the sleeping mother. Well, the young king was just then coming into the big barn from hunting, and as soon as he entered the house she beckoned to him, shed a few crocodile tears, began to cry and wring her hands, and hurried him along the passage to the bedchamber. Oh, wasn't the poor king frightened when he saw the queen's mouth bloody and missed his child? It would take 2 hours to tell you the devilment of the old queen, the confusion and fright, the grief of the young king and queen, the bad opinion he began to feel of his wife, and the struggle she had to keep down her bitter sorrow and not give way to it by speaking or lamenting. The young king would not allow anyone to be called, and ordered his stepmother to give out that the child fell from the mother's arms out the window, and that a wild beast ran off with it. The wicked woman pretended to do so, but she told underhand to everybody she spoke to what the king and herself saw in the bedchamber. The young queen was the most unhappy woman in the 3 kingdoms for a long time, between sorrow for her child and her husband's bad opinion. Still, she never spoke nor cried, and she gathered bog down and went on with the shirts. Often the 12 wild geese would be seen lighting on the trees in the park or on the smooth sod and looking in at her windows. So she worked on to get the shirts finished, but another year was at an end, and she had the 12th shirt finished except for one arm, which she was obliged to take to her bed, and a beautiful girl was born. Now the king was on his guard, and he would not let the mother and child be left alone for a minute. But the wicked woman bribed some of the attendants, set others asleep, gave the sleepy posset to the queen, and had a person watching to snatch the child away and kill it. But what should she see but the same wolf in the garden, looking up and licking his chops again? Out went the child, and away with it flew the wolf, and she smeared the sleeping mother's mouth and face with blood, and then roared and bawled and cried out to the king and to everybody she met, and the room was filled, and everybody was sure the young queen had just devoured her own babe. The poor mother thought now her life would leave her. She was in such a state that she could neither think nor pray, but she sat like a stone and worked away at the arm of the 12th shirt. The king was for taking her to the house in the wood where he found her, but the stepmother and the lords of the court and the judges would not hear of it, and she was condemned to be burned in the big barn at 3 o'clock the same day. When the hour drew near, the king went to the farthest part of his palace, and there was no more unhappy man in his kingdom at that hour. When the executioners came and led her off, she took the pile of shirts in her arms. There was still a few stitches wanted, and while they were tying her to the stake, she still worked on. At the last stitch she seemed overcome and dropped a tear on her work, but the moment after she sprang up and shouted, "I am innocent! Call my husband!" The executioners stayed their hands, except one wicked-disposed creature who set fire to the faggot next to him, and while all were struck in amaze, there was a rushing of wings, and in a moment the 12 wild geese were standing around the pile. Before you could count 12, she flung a shirt over each bird, and there, in the twinkling of an eye, were 12 of the finest young men that could be collected out of 1,000. While some were untying their sister, the eldest, taking a strong stake in his hand, struck the busy executioner with such a blow that he never needed another. While they were comforting the young queen, and the king was hurrying to the spot, a fine-looking woman appeared among them, holding the babe on one arm and the little prince by the hand. There was nothing but crying for joy, and laughing for joy, and hugging and kissing, and when any one had time to thank the good fairy, who, in the shape of a wolf, carried the child away, she was not to be found. Never was such happiness enjoyed in any palace that was ever built, and if the wicked queen and her helpers were not torn by wild horses, they richly deserved it. End of The 12 Wild Geese by Patrick Kennedy, read by Noelle Merritt.
The White Cat by the Comtesse d'Aulnoy. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Penny Carrington. There was once a king who had 3 sons, and because they were all so good and so handsome, he could not make up his mind to which of them to give his kingdom, for he was growing an old man, and began to think it would soon be time for him to let one of them reign in his stead. So he determined to set them a task to perform, and whichever should be the most successful was to have the kingdom as his reward. It was some time before he could decide what the task should be, but at last he told them that he had a fancy for a very beautiful little dog, and that they were all to set out to find one for him. They were to have a whole year in which to search, and were all to return to the castle on the same day and present the various dogs they had chosen at the same hour. The three princes were greatly surprised by their father's sudden fancy for a little dog. But when they heard that whichever of them brought back the prettiest little animal was to succeed his father on the throne, they made no further objection, for it gave the two younger sons a chance they would not otherwise have had of being king. So they bade their father goodbye, and after agreeing to be back at the castle at the same hour and on the same day, when a year should have passed away, the three brothers all started together. A great number of lords and servants accompanied them out of the city, but when they had ridden about a league, they sent everyone back, and after embracing one another affectionately, they all set out to try their luck in different directions. The two eldest met with many adventures on their travels, but the youngest saw the most wonderful sights of all. He was young and handsome, and as clever as a prince should be, besides being brave. Wherever he went, he inquired for dogs, and hardly a day passed without his buying several. Big and little, greyhounds, spaniels, lapdogs, and sheepdogs. In fact, every kind of dog you could think of. And very soon he had a troop of 50 or 60 trotting along behind him, one of which he thought would surely win the prize. So he journeyed on from day to day, not knowing where he was going, until one night he lost his way in a thick, dark forest. And after wandering many weary miles in the wind and rain, he was glad to see at last a bright light shining through the trees. He thought he must be near some woodcutter's cottage, but what was his surprise when he found himself before the gateway of a splendid castle. At first he hesitated about entering, for his garments were travel-stained, and he was drenched with rain, so that no one could have possibly taken him for a prince. All the beautiful little dogs he had taken so much trouble to collect had been lost in the forest, and he was thoroughly weary and disheartened. However, something seemed to bid him enter the castle, so he pulled the bell. Immediately the gateway flew open, and a number of beautiful white hands appeared, and beckoned to him to cross the courtyard and enter the great hall. Here he found a splendid fire blazing, beside which stood a comfortable armchair. The hands pointed invitingly towards it, and as soon as the prince had seated himself, they proceeded to take off his wet, muddy clothes and dress him in a magnificent suit of silk and velvet. When he was ready, the hands led him into a brilliantly lighted room, in which was a table spread for supper. At the end of the room was a raised platform, upon which a number of cats were seated, all playing different musical instruments. The prince began to think he must be dreaming, when the door opened and a lovely little white cat came in. She wore a long black veil and was accompanied by a number of cats, dressed in black and carrying swords. She came straight up to the prince, and in a sweet, sad little voice bade him welcome. Then she ordered supper to be served, and the whole company sat down together. They were waited upon by the mysterious hands, but many of the dishes were not to the prince's liking. Stewed rats and mice may be a first-rate meal for a cat, but the prince did not feel inclined to try them. However, the white cat ordered the hands to serve the prince with the dishes he liked best, and at once, without his even mentioning his favorite food, he was supplied with every dainty he could think of. After the prince had satisfied his hunger, he noticed that the cat wore a bracelet upon her paw, in which was set a miniature of himself. But when he questioned her about it, she sighed, and seemed so sad that, like a well-behaved prince, he said no more about the matter. Soon after supper, the hands conducted him to bed, when he at once fell fast asleep, and did not awaken until late the next morning. On looking out of his window, he saw that the white cat and her attendants were about to start out on a hunting expedition. As soon as the hands had dressed him in a hunting suit of green, he hurried down to join his hostess. The hands led him up to a wooden horse and seemed to expect him to mount. At first the prince was inclined to be angry, but the white cat told him so gently that she had no better steed to offer him that he at once mounted, feeling very ashamed of his ill humor. They had an excellent day's sport. The white cat, who rode a monkey, proved herself a clever huntress, climbing the tallest trees with the greatest ease without once falling from her steed. Never was there a pleasanter hunting party, and day after day the time passed so happily away that the prince forgot all about the little dog he was searching for, and even forgot his own home and his father's promise. At length the white cat reminded him that in 3 days he must appear at court, and the prince was terribly upset to think that he had now no chance of winning his father's kingdom. But the white cat told him that all would be well, and giving him an acorn, bid him mount the wooden horse and ride away. The prince thought she must be mocking him, but when she held the acorn to his ear, he heard quite plainly a little dog's bark. "Inside this acorn," she said, "is the prettiest little dog in the world. But be sure you do not open the fruit until you are in the king's presence." The prince thanked her, and having bidden her a sorrowful farewell, mounted his wooden steed and rode away. Before he reached the castle, he met his 2 brothers, who made fine fun of the wooden horse, and also of the big ugly dog which trotted by his side. They imagined this to be the one their brother had brought back from his travels, hoping that it would gain the prize. When they reached the palace, everyone was loud in praise of the 2 lovely little dogs the elder brothers had brought back with them. But when the youngest opened his acorn and showed a tiny dog lying upon a white satin cushion, they knew that this must be the prettiest little dog in the world. However, the king did not feel inclined to give up his throne just yet, so he told the brothers that there was one more task they must first perform. They must bring him a piece of muslin so fine that it would pass through the eye of a needle. So once more the brothers set out upon their travels. As for the youngest, he mounted his wooden horse and rode straight back to his dear white cat. She was delighted to welcome him, and when the prince told her that the king had now ordered him to find a piece of muslin fine enough to go through an eye of the needle, she smiled at him very sweetly and told him to be of good cheer. "In my palace I have some very clever spinners," she said, "and I will set them to work upon the muslin." The prince had begun to suspect by this time that the white cat was no ordinary pussy, but whenever he begged her to tell him her story, she only shook her head mournfully and sighed. Well, the 2nd year passed as quickly as the first, and the night before the day on which the 3 princes were expected at their father's court, the white cat gave the young prince a walnut, telling him that it contained the muslin. Then she bade him good-bye, and he mounted the wooden horse and rode away. This time the young prince was so late that his brothers had already begun to display their pieces of muslin to the king when he arrived at the castle gates. The materials they had brought were of extremely fine texture, and passed easily through the eye of a darning needle, but through the small needle the king had provided they would not pass. Then the youngest prince stepped into the great hall and produced his walnut. He cracked it carefully and found inside a hazelnut. This, when cracked, held a cherry stone. Inside the cherry stone was a grain of wheat, and in the wheat a millet seed. The prince began to mistrust the white cat, but he instantly felt a cat's claw scratch him gently. So he persevered, opened the millet seed, and found inside a beautiful piece of soft white muslin that was 400 ells long at the very least. It passed with the greatest ease through the eye of the smallest needle in the kingdom, and the prince felt that now the prize must be his. But the old king was still very loath to give up ruling, so he told the princes that before any one of them could become king, he must find a princess to marry him who would be lovely enough to grace her high station, and whichever other princess brought home the most beautiful bride should really have the kingdom for his own. Of course, the prince went back to the white cat and told her how very unfairly his father had behaved to him. She comforted him as best she could and told him not to be afraid, for she would introduce him to the loveliest princess the sun had ever shone upon. The appointed time passed happily away, and one evening the white cat reminded the prince that on the next day he must return home. "Alas," said he, "where shall I find a princess now? The time is so short that I cannot even look for one." Then the white cat told him that if only he would do as she bade him, all would be well. "Take your sword, cut off my head and my tail, and cast them into the flames," she said. The prince declared that on no account would he treat her so cruelly, but she begged him so earnestly to do as she asked that at last he consented. No sooner had he cast the head and the tail into the fire than a beautiful princess appeared where the body of the cat had been. The spell that had been cast upon her was broken, and at the same time her courtiers and attendants, who had also been changed into cats, hastened in their proper forms again to pay their respects to their mistress. The prince at once fell deeply in love with the charming princess and begged her to accompany him to his father's court as his bride. She consented, and together they rode away. During the journey, the princess told her husband the story of her enchantment. She had been brought up by the fairies, who treated her with great kindness until she offended them by falling in love with a young man whose portrait the prince had seen upon her paw, and who exactly resembled him. Now the fairies wished her to marry the king of the dwarfs, and were so angry when she declared she would marry no one but her own true love, that they changed her into a white cat as a punishment. When the prince and his bride reached the court, all were bound to acknowledge that the princess was by far the loveliest lady they had ever seen. So the poor old king felt that now he would be obliged to give up his kingdom. But the princess knelt by his side, kissed his hand gently, and told him that there was no reason for him to cease ruling, for she was rich enough to give a mighty kingdom to each of his elder sons, and still have 3 left for herself and her dear husband. So everyone was pleased, and there was great rejoicing and feasting in the king's palace, and they all lived happily ever after. End of The White Cat by the Comtesse d'Aulnoy.